Welcome to HangTime Indiana, the official podcast of State Champs Indiana. And we're big time now because we got a sponsor. Thanks to our friends at Lawrence Tech. For more information, simply log on to ltu.edu. Alongside Drake Wally from Shine at 99 in Frankfurt, my name is Greg Rakestraw, the Vice President of the ISC Sports Network. And if you have watched us over the last few weeks, you realize that filling a half an hour or so is not exactly a problem for us, but especially now, with girls semi-state in the rearview mirror, girls state finals coming up this weekend, and oh yes, just a couple of days ago, it was the pairings show, of which I was fortunate to be a part of for the IHSAA Champions Network. And a week from now, it is state tournament time in boys basketball. Drake, I'm not sure we can fit everything in. So enough of my pontification. The floor is yours.
Well, before we get rolling into what was absolutely an amazing week, as usual here, getting to the state finals for girls and the sectional pairings for boys, we do need to remind all of the people that you can follow HangTime Indiana every single Wednesday on Facebook and on YouTube. And then let's not forget about the highlights that you can find on our Facebook page at State Champs Indiana or on Twitter at State Champs Indy. Now, before we get talking about the sectional pairings for the boys, which was so exciting, we actually need to cover some of the games. Just kind of give us some of the things that we saw in the semi-state week at girls.
I think the big surprise was the fact that number one Central Noble lost for the first and only time this year, and that Oak Hill handled them the way they did. 53-36 was the final score in that one. Now, again, Oak Hill was in the state championship game the year before. So it's not a major surprise, and they were rated just below them as far as being number 3 in the state. But that was clearly the most surprising result of the course of the weekend. Not just the fact that Oak Hill won, that they won as handily as they did. Probably shouldn't be surprised that Evansville Mater Dei gave Winchester as good of a game as they did because, again, the level of competition that Mater Dei plays in the Southern Indiana Athletic Conference. Lawrence North, once they got out of their sectional, you felt they could make a deep run. Once they got past Ben Davis in the regional round, you felt they were the favorites to get there. But this is a case where it is going to be kind of old hat for a lot of these teams in terms of getting to Bankers Life Fieldhouse. Literally, we have 4 teams that were there a year ago. Both 1A teams, as we expected. Marquette Catholic, as well as Vincennes Reveille. In 2A, Winchester. In 3A, Northwestern. Then you go Oak Hill. That was there a couple of years earlier. You've got Hamilton Southeastern and Lawrence North. Speaking of familiarity, they played each other on January the 15th. And even the newbie in Benton Central is a traditional powerhouse, outstanding more years than not in girls basketball. And they're in the same conference as Northwestern, even though they did not play during the course of this season. So their familiarity, I think, is the word to describe what's going to happen on Saturday at Bankers Life Fieldhouse.
Well, and see, you kind of hinted to that last week, how Northwestern and Benton Central hadn't even played each other, and yet they are in the same exact conference, yet now they are going to be competing for a state championship.
So let's explain how this works. They play in the Hoosier Conference, which is a 10-team league. They go into 2 divisions of 5 teams in each division. You are only mandated to play the teams in your division. Then there is a crossover game at the end of the season to determine first place, third place, fifth place, seventh place, and ninth place in the Hoosier Conference. Because of Northwestern anticipating and because they won the regional, they knew they were heading to 4A next year. And given how good they have been the last couple of years, they played a largely 4A schedule. Northwestern lost 3 times all year, 2 to schools from Ohio, the other one to North Central at Bankers Life Fieldhouse as part of Basketball Day in Indiana on January the 18th. So they added a lot of 4A schools, didn't play anybody else kind of outside of their division in the Hoosier Conference. Benton Central, in their half of the conference, was, you'd say, upset. Central Catholic's a ranked team, but they lost to CC by 1, which then Northwestern then played for the 3rd place game and not the 1st place game, which Northwestern then beat Lafayette Central Catholic in the 1st place game. So yes, they're in the same league, but they were in different halves of the brackets, and they did not play each other during the regular season.
And so what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to discuss those exact facts that Greg just covered, except we're going to cover each team and each game, 1A through 4A, and we're going to start with 1A. We've been talking about Northwestern, we've been talking about the bigger schools, but we got to start with 1A. We have got Marquette Catholic Blazers against the Vincennes-Reveille Patriots. Now, Marquette Catholic, Katie Kalinin, she coaches them to 26-2, a very impressive record on the season, and the Nolan sisters will obviously be the focus in this game. They averaged 37.5 of 59 team points. And now we go on to Vincennes-Reveille Patriots. Rick Marshall has them at an undefeated season, and they just came off of a very impressive 61-50 victory against University.
And probably University, the best other team outside of those two, as it was the top 4 teams in 1A made it, with Marquette Catholic getting past Northfield in terms of their semi-state game as well. The Nolan twins versus Grace Wagner. Again, so many of these players, not all, but the vast majority of them played in the state championship game. And for Marquette Catholic, it's remarkable. In boys basketball, I guess now 4 and 5 years ago, in back-to-back years, they played Bar Reeve in the 1A state championship game, and Bar Reeve and Marquette Catholic split those games. I would not be surprised if that's the way it works out if Reveille gets them this time, but I'm not saying that because I think Reveille is suddenly better. I think because the two teams are so even. And so I guess I kind of lean towards the team that didn't get the double D last year. You've got the Nolan twins. You've got Grace Wagner that leads things for Reveille. Again, this is truly a 50-50 game. It was a game that wasn't decided until the final minute a year ago. I expect the same thing coming up on Saturday morning.
It's going to be a very familiar game in 1A, and now to move on to 2A, we have the Oak Hill Golden Eagles. I call it the Golden Game, if you will. It's the Golden Eagles of Oak Hill against the Golden Falcons of Winchester Community. Todd Law has the Golden Eagles at 24-3. They just defeated Central Noble, as Greg alluded to, 53-36. And then on the Winchester side, as we've talked about multiple times now on this show, Holly Gutierrez has got them at 26-3, and they just got by Evansville Mater Dei 59-50.
All right, so Winchester, obviously there a year ago, and again, they had to overcome one of their key players being injured in the state championship game last year. So it's great for them that they could get back to this point. And now for Oak Hill, again, some different pieces, but as a program, they have been here multiple times, including 2 years ago when they were knocked off by Eastern of Pekin in the 2A state championship game. So these two programs know each other very well. They know what it's like to play in Bankers Life Fieldhouse and play on this stage. Expect this game to be a really good one, even if it's not exactly the matchup we thought we might have, as we're expecting Central Noble and Winchester to face off for a second year in a row.
And now we're going to move on to a game that we have talked about a couple times. Greg already talked about the fascinating aspects of it. We've got Northwestern against Benton Central. Obviously, Kathy Layden has got this team playing out of their minds. I mean, you know, Madison Layden and Kendall Bostic, 40 of the team's 67 points. And then for Benton Central, David Baxter, 27-4. He's got the Bison, and they just defeated Salem 48-34. That's going to be a good game.
No doubt about it. And I think Benton Central, because they're in the same league, you know, they haven't played this year, I do think that takes some of the intimidation factor out of the mix. Now, it's not like anybody's been really than 25 points of Northwestern the entire postseason run anyway. And what I think was interesting, after talking to both these head coaches yesterday, you've got the top 2 players for Northwestern that are going to go to, in Madison Layden, Purdue, Kendall Bostic to Michigan State. The top player for Benton Central is going to go to Ball State. She's going to be a student. She's not playing college basketball. So it kind of gives you a difference of the level of talent here. Benton Central has kind of embraced that underdog role all the way through the tournament. They're going to be living it over the next few days. They know they have to play a near perfect game to beat Northwestern, but at the same time, what that does, it allows you to relax and just go out and play, knowing there's not the pressure of outside expectations on you. You know the other team, how good they are going to be. Expect Benton Central to be relaxed, but still expect Northwestern to come away with a victory on Saturday night.
Well, and that kind of feeling can actually be one of the most calming effects of a big game like that. And so To wrap it all up for the girls, we have the 4A state championship game, Hamilton Southeastern Royals against the Lawrence North Wildcats. Chris Huppenthal has got the Royals at 26-1. Sydney Parrish, as Greg and I have talked about show after show, 20 points, 2 steals a game. And then for Lawrence North, Chris Giffen has got them very strong coming into this game. They just defeated Castle 50-40 to reach the big game.
So again, these two teams played on January the 15th, and HSE won by a score of 56-45. We talked about this with Northwestern. They've got 3 losses, 2 to teams from out of state. HSE's 1 loss is also an out-of-state team. It was to Ryle of Kentucky back in December, so no one in the state has beaten them. It has been over a decade since HSE got out of their sectional. It shows you how tough their sectional has been, whether it's been Carmel the last couple of years, or Fishers, or Westfield, or Noblesville. HSE, perennially one of the best programs in the state. It's just the feeling is if you can get out of that sectional, you're going to go far. Yeah. Lawrence North would say the exact same thing about their sectional, because we raved about the fact that the defending state champs, Warren Central, were in that sectional. Then North Central, who we talked about already beating Northwestern back in January, were in that sectional. Those two play each other the first night. Winner against Lawrence North. Lawrence North then beats them. Then Lawrence North had to get past a multiple-time state championship in Heritage Christian just to make it out of their section. So literally, once you saw HSE, and maybe it wasn't as obvious with LM, but looking back at it, you go, yep, 2 best sectionals in the state. Those are the 2 teams that are still left playing. What is unique about this matchup is that LN is not a very big basketball team, and their lone player above 6 feet tall suffered a knee injury in the regional and is not going to play in the state championship game. Did not play in the semi-state last week. It's an HSE team that has great length, likes to switch a lot of what they do defensively, and so simply put, can Lawrence North knock down enough shots to be able to shoot over the great defensive length of Hamilton Southeastern? That's what the 4A state championship game will come down to.
Well, and we have, those are the state games for the girls, but we have to backtrack and rewind all the way back to sectional, because now it's actually time to talk about some of the games that led up to the boys' sectional drawing. We had 4 massive games, and we'll just briefly cover them. Let's start with Carmel defeating Warren Central, not by 1 point, not by 2, but by 17 points, 69-52, heading right into section.
I think you did a great job of highlighting what was stunning about that game. Not the fact that Carmel won that game, but the fact that they won with as relative ease as they did. The fact that Carmel held Warren to 52 points, not a surprise. Teams don't usually score 50 against Carmel. Only one has scored more than 60 all year against the Greyhounds. It's the fact that Carmel scored 69 in that game, because really, they've not been a great offensive team. They have won because of their defense. Karsten Windland had a fantastic night, and he probably doesn't get the recognition he deserves, because so much attention goes to a John Michael Malloy, or the 3-point shooting of Andrew Owens, or the fact you've got the former coach's son in Luke Hetty that will now go play for his dad at Marion University next year. Well, Carson's a coach's kid too, and Carson is a really tough basketball player. Ryan Osborne does not have a deep team, but the kids that he's got play so well and play so well together. Carmel is going to be a tough out in the postseason, and I think the entire state saw that with the way they handled Warren Central on Friday night.
Well, in another game that featured 2 teams that everybody's going to be looking at going into sectional, Zionsville edges Fisher 48-44, a close contest for that one.
Well, Zionsville was on everybody's radar all year after they won a sectional last year, because Isaiah Thompson's going to go to Purdue, and Isaiah crossed the 2,000-point threshold in his career a few games ago. Zionsville just ran the table in the HCC. It's not the MIC, but it's the next best thing as far as great conferences are concerned in the state of Indiana. Fishers is not a team that was on many people's radar to start the year, but Matt Moore has done a wonderful job at Fishers this year. Fishers kind of got on people's radar when they beat Hamilton Southeastern in their rivalry Mudsock game back on December the 14th by a point, and that game was for the conference championship. So Zionsville wins the HCC. They now go a little bit further north in the bracket. They'll play in Sectional 7 in Kokomo, and while they're the favorite, they do have to contend with the likes of a Lafayette Jeff or a Logansport. Probably play both those teams the way the sectional draw was able to work through. Now for Fishers, can you get past Carmel, which amazingly, given the proximity of those 2 schools, they don't play during the regular season. The draw is set up to where they'll likely face each other in a sectional semifinal. And can Matt Moore have something for Ryan Osborne's team at Carmel? We'll find out. Good year for the Fishers, very good year for Zionsville. Again, maybe Zionsville goes farther in the postseason just because of Fishers has to face Carmel in the sectional, whereas opposed to Zionsville, If they get out of Kokomo, you would think they would likely face Carmel in the regional round at Logansport.
We got a couple more games we want to cover real quick here. We had Ben Davis gets by Cathedral by 1 point, 56-55. Tell us about that spectacular game.
Well, I was there for it, covering it for the ISC Sports Network. And if I have a favorite player in the state of Indiana, I'm not saying he's the best player. He's really good. I like DeJuan Jones. Our waistlines kind of resemble each other. Difference is I'm not 6'8". I can't dunk a basketball, and I'm not going to play football at Ohio State next year. Other than that, we're very similar. But DeJuan had a good game, but had foul trouble early in that contest, so Jalen Wyndham took over. There are 4 Division I athletes that start for Don Carlisle at Ben Davis. Only one of them is Division I in basketball, and that's Jalen Wyndham, who really is kind of the last link to Mark James's state championship team 2 years ago at Ben Davis High School. He was a sophomore that started on that team that won their first state title in some 21 years. Jalen's going to play for my buddy Ron Hunter down at Georgia State next year. Jalen had 23 in the win, 19 of those in the first half, 19 of the first 32 points that Ben Davis scored in that game. Ben Davis has 7 losses on the season. They're all the teams ranked in the top 12 in the state of Indiana.
It's a very deceiving record.
Exactly. So that's why that Cathedral game was huge. So I don't look at that game as a negative on Cathedral. It's an acknowledgement of how good Ben Davis is. And again, if Ben Davis can get out of their sectional, if they can get by Pike, they've split their 2 matchups with Pike this year because of they're such a tough cover, because no one has anybody that matches up with DeJuan Jones, because Wyndham can get as hot as he is, and because this is a very senior-laden group. If they all weren't key pieces on that state championship, I mean, they were around that state championship, they know what it's like to win games in the postseason. If they can get past Pike, I think Ben Davis is capable of going on a run, knowing that they got to play a great team, if not a couple of them, in the regional round at Southport.
Hey, before we jump into sectionals, let's talk about one more game. We have Blackhawk Christian defeated Marion 69-60, and that's a tough win.
And I have seen some, what I would say, unintelligent folks on social media that assume that Marion was overlooking Fort Wayne Blackhawk. No. Marion's good. So is Fort Wayne Blackhawk Christian too. And one of the things that is unique about Blackhawk in 1A is their size. They have 3A or 4A size. They are one of the best 20 or 25 basketball teams. And I use that number specifically because we'll give rankings. Those are the AP, and I'm an AP voter, that rank them by class. The coaches put them in a 1-class poll. And Fort Wayne Blackhawk Christian has been in that coaches poll. It's a top 20 team, kind of on and off throughout the course of the year. So that was not Marion overlooking Fort Wayne Blackhawk. That was Fort Wayne Blackhawk potentially being a better basketball team than Marion. Now, that does not mean that Marion can't win a sectional or go far in 3A. That's how good Fort Wayne Blackhawk Christian is.
Well, and speaking of Fort Wayne Blackhawk, we are going to jump right into the sectionals. We're going to cover each class, a couple teams that we find very fascinating and who we want to keep, definitely within our sights when it goes straight into sectional. And then on top of that, we are going to have Greg tell us some of the more exciting things that are going on in each class. We're going to jump right into 1A, and I am going to talk about Fort Wayne Blackhawk Christian Braves, which that's kind of confusing. Fort Wayne Blackhawk Christian Braves, they are being coached by Mark Davidson. They have senior Frankie Davidson averaging 22 points a game, and one thing that's not confusing is that they are dominant. As we just said, they defeated Marion 69-60.
And you left me, and as good as Frankie Davidson is, I'll go with Caleb first, their 6'10 sophomore, who's on the radar of a lot of Big Ten programs because of his size. They were thought to be the heavy favorite last year and just were beaten by a great offensive juggernaut in Southwood in the semi-state a year ago. And so people expect Fort Wayne Blackhawk to make it to the semi-state round and potentially further this time around. You would think maybe Central Catholic might be the team kind of awaiting them at the semi-state level this year. Last year it was Southwood that was able to get past Central Catholic and then beat Blackhawk Christian, but that group largely graduated from a season ago. Fort Wayne Blackhawk Christian, a team that will be playing deep into the month of March.
Well, one more team that I would like to talk about is the Bar Reeve Vikings. Josh Thompson is the head coach of that team. He has them going very strong into sectional. And let's not forget the last game they played was against Princeton, and they defeated them 7-68 in a ridiculous 2-overtime finish.
And for those that don't know Princeton, a very good 3A team and a team that could win a sectional. So it's fitting we bring up these teams in this week where they both beat outstanding 3A competition. For as good as, say, 4A is, where we've kind of said, okay, Warren, Carmel, LC, maybe not in that order, right now at least, are 1, 2, and 3. Then there's kind of a cutoff. In 1A, that's the cutoff, 1 and 2. University's very good at 3, but there is a gap from Fort Wayne Blackhawk Christian and Bar Reeve to University. And what is also unique is that these teams have already played each other. Fort Wayne Blackhawk went down to the Graber Post Classic at North Davies and played Bar Reeve in that tournament at the end of December, and Blackhawk Christian got the win. Again, I think most of us would be surprised if those teams don't face each other again at Bankers Life Fieldhouse on March 23rd.
So now we're going to go straight into 2A, and two of the teams that I find fascinating are the LaVille Lancers and the Shenandoah Raiders. Mike Edison is the head coach of the LaVille Lancers. He has them going also very strong into sectional, and let's not forget Luke Beeler heading that team with 16 points a game.
The crazy thing is LaVille's not even the best team in their sectional. Now, they're certainly a team that can make a run if they can get out of their sectional, but last year they and Westview met in the semifinals of that sectional. Westview won it. The two teams had a combined 1 loss going into that game. Both Westview and LaVille really kind of tried to up their schedules as best they could during the course of this regular season. But again, they don't play each other during the course of the regular season. You're out there in the same sectional. So LaVille, one of their losses, they've had 3 so far in the year, was with a very good team in 2A in Indianapolis Howe, which we're going to reference. The next team that you talk about, we'll reference Indianapolis Howe there as well. But LaVille this weekend just beat South Bend St. Joe, a very good 3A team from their area. So if LaVille get out of their sectional, they're going to keep going for a while, but they got to get by Westview, who all 4 of their losses have been to 4A teams, including 2 in the Raymond James Hall of Fame Classic at Newcastle in terms of games against Center Grove and Valparaiso, teams that have been ranked for a good chunk of the year as far as the 4A classification is concerned. Prairie Heights in that sectional is 16-5, so that is a loaded sectional 35 that LaVille is in. And given Coach Edison's background, his dad being a legendary head coach at Plymouth and Michael being a fantastic player in his own right as well, it won't be because of a lack of coaching if they don't get out of that sectional. It's just because there's a lot of good teams in that 2A sectional.
Well, and speaking of 2A, you have so many teams that are very good, and it's very wide open, as we've kind of alluded to with boys basketball. 2A is wide open. Another class that's exciting to watch is 3A. We have the Culver Academy Eagles, and we have the Delta Eagles. It's the Eagles show. We have got Mark Galloway, the head coach of Culver, Ethan Britton Watts, Deontay Craig, and Trey Galloway, all average over 10 points per game.
And frankly, all those kids are Division I athletes. Now, Deontay may be a football player instead of a basketball player, but Ethan of that group is a senior. Deontay and Trey are both juniors. Ethan Britton Watts was a junior all-star last year. I think he's got a good chance of being a senior all-star as well. Ooh. Ethan's numbers kind of get hurt by the fact he's got 2 of their really good players with him.
Got to
his
distribute
numbers
the ball.
aren't as superlative. But Culver, of course, the defending state champs, what their issue is, they're not very deep. If they could play 5 and that's it, I think that's what they would do. And so depth is their concern, but their starting 5 is as good as any team in the state in any classification. And a loss they had this weekend should actually impress you. They lost to LaPorte La Lumiere. Not an IHSA member, but a team that plays on the national prep level. Wow. And Culver Academy lost to them by 1 point.
Wow.
Culver Academy beat Cathedral at Bankers Life Fieldhouse at the end of January. They did lose to a team with a bit more size in Hamilton Southeastern at the Forum Tip-Off Classic during the month of March, or during the month of December. They beat Brebeuf Jesuit right before that in early December as well. Team. Culver Academy is an outstanding team. And again, they'll have a tough path. They've got to deal with a great Mishawaka Marion team in their sectional. As far as the regional round, Northwestern, who was undefeated until a couple of weeks ago, could be waiting for them. Then you're looking at Delta or Marion or somebody like that. So it won't be easy for them every step of the way, but they're as good as any 3A team in the state of Indiana.
And Greg, that's interesting that you mentioned Delta. Tell us a little bit more about the undefeated Delta squad.
Well, Drake, the interesting thing is that Delta wasn't really anybody's radar, coming into the season. They had a solid year. I think Mark Detweiler won 16, 17, 18 games in his first year at Delta a year ago. He had been at Union County for many years and built that into a solid 2A program. Had been at Randolph Southern briefly before that. But Delta, a team that you go back 15 years ago, they won the 2002 3A state championship. In the last days of one-class basketball, they had a great run deep into the tournament back in 1997, but they'd kind of fallen off the radar. But they've got some stars there, no doubt. But what Delta is the last of the Mohicans. They are the last undefeated basketball team in the state of Indiana. They are 22-0. They play Muncie Burris this week. They'll likely be 23-0 heading to their sectional, but it is by no means a guarantee they get out of their sectional. They played Newcastle a couple of weeks ago. Newcastle led by one of the best scorers in the state, and Luke Bumbelow. Yep. Delta had to come from behind to win that game, 61-55. Hamilton Heights is a very good basketball team in that sectional as well. And then there is Blackford. Blackford led by the most prolific scorer in the state in Luke Brown. I know that our cameras were there to cover their game against Wabash this weekend, and while it did not go well for Blackford, Luke Brown had another fantastic game, and he is just 16 points away from breaking the all-time scoring record at Blackford High School in basically playing about 1 2/3 seasons because he missed the last 8 games of last year due to a broken bone in his leg. He has a legitimate chance, as does a kid like Jalen Blackman, of threatening the 3,000-point mark in the state of Indiana, of which there have been 4 guys in the history of this state get to that level. Damon Bailey, Marion Pierce of Louisville back in 1961, Deshaun Thomas of Fort Wayne Bishop Luers in 2010, and Romeo Langford a season ago. Both those guys have a chance to get to that level, but that's a couple of years from now. Now, in terms of the sectional, I'd probably put Blackford fourth of those teams just because of maybe the talent around Luke. He'll be worth the price of admission. But in terms of Delta, Hamilton Heights, and Newcastle on their home floor, that sectional 24 at Newcastle, you probably need to get your tickets now. Even with 10,000 people that can fit into that building, they might come close to selling the place out in a couple of weeks.
We've got one more class that we need to cover, and yes, we are going to bring up 2 teams that we have probably brought up a little too much, but with good reason. 4A basketball, we've got the Carmel Greyhounds, Ryan Osborne, and they are one of the strongest teams for 4A. Tell us a little bit about Ryan Osborne.
Well, again, Ozzy and I go back nearly 20 years. So Ryan is from Logansport, was a walk-on at IUPUI. Ozzy and I were occasional roommates on the road during the days at IUPUI as I was the radio announcer during his playing days. He is a great coach and a better person. So Ryan was a longtime assistant for Jason Young at Avon. Then when Scott Hetty got the job at Carmel, Ryan went to join his staff. And when Scott decided to go to the college ranks and be the coach at Marion, for those that were around the program, we knew it was obvious. It may not have been obvious to those outside of the program, but those in kind of coaching circles in Central Indiana knew that Ozzy would hit the ground running. So in his first year as a head coach, Carmel goes to the state championship game last year, and I think a lot of us have that same expectation this year as well. Again, Carmel, as I said earlier, not overly deep, but the 5 or 6 guys they play are really, really good.
Well, and then let's finish this with talking about the rival that Carmel just defeated soundly, which they are more than definitely going to come back from that, and that is the Warren Central Warriors. Chris Beyer, only 2 losses. They had a 46-game win streak, and then they are one of also the strongest teams going into 4A with Carmel, too.
In the last 3 years, they've lost 5 times. They were 21-3 2 years ago, knocked off the first night of the sectional by Lawrence North. 32-0 last year. They've lost twice this year to the teams that are currently ranked 1 and 2 in the state of Indiana, that being Carmel and Lawrence Central. Warren Central will get a crack at Lawrence Central at some point in time in the sectional, and if that happens, it would be in the sectional championship game. The draw in sectional 10 was everything. Cathedral and LN play the first night. Winner gets Warren Central. Winner likely gets Lawrence Central in the championship game. Chris Byers got after his team, kind of in the media, which you don't hear coaches do very often, but Chris knows his team so well and knows that he can do it because they're so experienced. They've had such success. He can kind of light into them like that. You see that at the college level or the professional level. You don't see it at the high school level very often.
Not very often,
but I know why he did it, and I tend to nod in agreement with him. And he's going to get. I think he's going to get something great out of his team because of that. But again, they may not make it out of the sectional just because their sectional is so ridiculously deep with, again, 4 top 15 teams and 3 top 10 teams in sectional number 10.
And sectional 10 is going to be an explosive sectional, going to be some of the best games in the tournament.
And shameless plug time, I'm calling all 5 of those games on the ISC Sports Network. So night number 1, Tech and North Central, then followed by Cathedral and Lawrence North. LC and Warren Central mix in on Friday night. Championship game, again, on Saturday night. ISCSportsNetwork.com. You can watch all 5 games.
So before we end the show here, we have to hit the crucial moment when we find out just what is on Greg Rakestraw's radar?
Well, one of the games we already touched on, Delta and Muncie Burris. Anytime a team can finish a season undefeated, at least a regular season, that gets your attention, so that game should be on there. Another one, I'm not sure how competitive the game is going to be, but it is a monumental night in the history of Indiana basketball. I just rattled off the 4 guys that have scored 3,000 points in their career. It's an even shorter list of coaches that have won 800 games in their career on the boys' side. It's 2. It's Jack Butcher at 806, legendary coach at Lagodi. The other one is J.R. Holmes, who got to 806 over the weekend when Bloomington South beat Jennings County on Saturday night. He goes for victory number 807, Thursday night at home against Northview. His Bloomington South team is really good. They're 20-3 going into this game, and they're a team that I think would be a sectional favorite. Maybe can get out of their regional as well. But Thursday night, while it's going to be senior night, it's also the night the state of Indiana pays attention to one of the greats to all-time do it, in the history of the game in terms of J.R. Holmes going for win number 807, become the all-time winningest coach in the history of Indiana high school boys basketball. And one other game, and I'm glad we use radar for this, because normally, radar picks up 75 miles within a town. This is off the radar. You got to go to the Louisville radar to pick this up. But in southern Indiana, Crawford County and Paoli play for the Patoka Lakes Athletic Conference Championship. And then they're the 2 favorites. They're in the same sectional in 2A. Crawford County's been in the top 10 for part of this year. Paoli just got back in it this week. 2 outstanding teams, probably going to play twice in the span of about 7 or 8 days. They'll play for a conference title first on Friday night. Could play for a sectional championship the following Saturday.
We've got boys sectional basketball. We've got girls state championship basketball. We will be covering both of those things next week on the show. Greg, as always, it has been a pleasure.
Drake, thank you very much. Thanks to Todd Young behind the scenes, and thanks to our presenting sponsor, our friends at Lawrence Tech. For Drake, this is Greg. We'll do it again next week, right here as you're watching on State Champs Indiana.